Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Eykel, and I am the Landlord Engagement Specialist here at Tacoma Housing Authority. And we are joined today by our friends at the City of Tacoma and the Fair Housing Department. And they are going to talk to us about housing protections for persons impacted by domestic violence and sexual assault. And I just want to thank the City of Tacoma Fair Housing team for doing these fair housing webinars for us. This will be the last one of 2023, and we will be working on setting up additional trainings probably in the second quarter of next year. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nancy.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexis. Yeah, first off, thank you all of you who this was originally scheduled to happen in October, and I had some electricity and power issues and we were not able to do it. So thanks for joining us now in November. So I appreciate that, first of all. And I'm joined, as Alexis said, my name is Nancy. I'm the Human Rights Manager with the City of Tacoma in the Office of Equity and Human Rights. We have Russ, who is our Fair Housing Coordinator here in our office. And then we have our new member of the team, Alejandra Villeda, and she will be managing our outreach and education going into the next year. So thanks so much for being here. And so we had planned on discussing this last month because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's always good to be aware though. So we will still cover this topic this month. So just to do a little preemptive, like we will be talking about things related to domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So sometimes that can be heavy for folks. So if it is something that you feel triggered by or anything like that, definitely like take a minute. You can mute me. It won't hurt my feelings. Step away from the screen, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. But if that's something that you need to do, totally understandable, and that's okay. So we will start with just what is fair housing. We kind of go over this every month. And so just talking about the right to choose housing free from unlawful discrimination. And so we have federal, state, and local fair housing laws that protect us in all transactions related to housing. So that could be rentals, sales, lending, and insurance. And this is just everyone deserves to have access. And we all know that, you know, fair housing is it's a need. It's something that everyone should have access to, and that's why we have these fair housing laws. The next slide I know is related to our protected classes. And so we have our protected classes that are federally protected across all of the United States. And then we have our additional protected classes in the state of Washington. And then we have even more here in the city of Tacoma. And so today we'll be talking about VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women's Act. And specifically within that law, there is language that protects all people, not just women, but it's called VAWA since the majority of people who experience domestic violence do tend to be women. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. There can be different protected classes that we would see through VAWA. So we could see gender, we could see sex, we could see marital status. Like there's lots of different ways that VAWA presents itself through the protected classes. So we're going to go through some scenarios, some different protections that we see. And this is something that HUD in 2022 kind of re-upped, and I think that's actually what we're going to talk about. They re-upped their affirmation to comply with the laws of VAWA. So first of all, let's talk about like what is domestic violence. So domestic violence in this context under VAWA, and I'm going to just keep saying VAWA because it's just easier than saying Violence Against Women's Act. So be patient with me with that. But it's any felony or misdemeanor crime committed by someone with a familial relationship. So usually it's current or former spouse, intimate partner. In the state of Washington, it can include family members, roommates, anyone that there's some kind of familial relationship. And these laws, specifically under VAWA, when we're talking about HUD, we're talking about if somebody receives any kind of grant funding. So it could be if you're someone who's accepting a Section 8 voucher, these are laws that you're going to need to comply with. and recognize, like, if somebody comes forward and tells you that they're a victim of domestic violence, there are certain protections that that person would have. There's some more information just about the definition of domestic violence under the rules of VAWA. It can be anything related to physical violence, sexual violence, harassment, anything that could be considered abusive or controlling behavior. And it doesn't always have to be a criminal act. So that's something and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but someone doesn't necessarily have to be charged with a crime for somebody to be considered a victim of domestic violence. So we'll talk about that. So I touched on this a little bit, like, who would be considered a victim? Like, how do we know that somebody has a domestic relationship? So it would be current or former spouse, intimate partner, so boyfriend, girlfriend, that type of situation. They don't have to be married. It could be like we call it common law marriage, right? I think I've heard people say that. So just anybody who has a romantic relationship. They could be living together with them, either as a spouse or an intimate partner, somebody who has children in common, or it could be children of that familial status relationship, right? So like if people have kids together, or the children themselves could be considered victims of domestic violence. So then so we talked about domestic violence. So then what would be dating violence? And then we'll talk about sexual assault, and we'll talk about stalking. So dating violence is, again, not married, right? But if they're in some kind of social, romantic, intimate nature, they could be together for a couple of days. They could be together for years, right? Like there's no like length of the relationship. It's very subjective. But the idea would be like, if they define it as a dating relationship, if one of the people does, it's pretty much a dating relationship. Sexual assault is any non-consensual sexual act. And again, it doesn't have to be reported as a crime. But if someone is not consenting to a sexual act, then it would be considered sexual assault. And then stalking is any type of conduct that someone is fearful for their safety, based on the other person's actions or based on things that they say. And if it causes them to have substantial emotional distress, right? So stalking can be something we see online. It can be in person. Like, I feel like the world is a very different place than it was 20 years ago, and the ways that people can stalk one another. And so people can be very creative. Like there's things where people will use air tags and put them, like the little like GPS trackers, put them on people's vehicles or even on their person in some way. They can put apps on their phone and stalk them. Or there's just the regular old just following people around. Like that's definitely still considered stalking. So then what is VAWA? Why do we have that? So VAWA is something that was passed by the federal government, and it has different protections in it. And one of what we're going to talk about today is specifically how VAWA relates to housing. And so specifically housing that has HUD money, and again, that can include somebody who's getting Section 8 money, would need to comply with the protections. And really, housing providers in general should be complying with some of the different things that we're going to be talking about. Anything? No, that's good. So this is what we mentioned earlier. In 2022, VAWA reauthorized their notice to the public about their authority to enforce anything related to VAWA. So when someone has a VAWA complaint, they can contact our office, but we would then refer it to HUD. They're the proper agency to be investigating any kind of VAWA complaint. So and it sounds like what we just heard.
Oh, yeah, we just got an update that it was heretofore filed in HUD's headquarters, but now HUD, the headquarters, has given the regional offices direction and authority to do the investigation itself.
So now it would be coming through Seattle. So if someone in our area, so for example, in City of Tacoma, if someone made a complaint, it would be investigated by the HUD office in the city of Seattle. So who does this apply to? So any applicant, application for and tenants of HUD housing programs for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And as I mentioned before, it's not just for women. It's applied to anyone who has experienced any of these types of violence. And so it's without regard to sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So even though it's called VAWA, it does apply to everyone. So we want to make sure that folks know that. So it can also apply to any guests, unassisted, unreported household members, live-in aides may be eligible. There's people have the right to report. So people should not be penalized for reporting any kind of domestic violence. And so a tenant can request protection if they have a live-in aide that's a victim, which might also mean an emergency transfer if they feel unsafe in their housing. And even if, let's say I have a live-in aide, I could request a transfer if my live-in aide is the person who's actually experiencing the domestic violence. So those are a few of the eligibility issues. And the idea behind this is that people who have experienced domestic violence have already experienced so much trauma and damage. And so we just want to make sure that we try to create as much stability for folks as possible. And so, you know, there are stories of housing authorities or landlords evicting victims in the past under zero tolerance crime policies, but not like if I'm a victim, I didn't actually commit the crime, it was my abuser, but somehow I'm held responsible for that. And that's just, that doesn't fly with our fair housing laws. And so that idea, or a victim being evicted when they're calling the police for assistance when they've been assaulted, or if there's a violation of a no contact order or any other kind of disturbance, that's also not, you know, people have the right to call 911 if they're in fear for their safety. Also, like victims should not be, well, they shouldn't be evicted because of property damage that's caused by their abusers. And this idea of kind of this double victimization, right? Like this is someone who's already been victimized by their abuser in the domestic violence. And now it's almost as if like the housing provider is kind of doubly victimizing them. And so that's why HUD has taken a stance and has made this a priority to make sure we in the community know what these laws are, so that then we can make sure that people are safe. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about some common scenarios. I don't necessarily have answers for all of these common scenarios. These are things that we see. And they're just things that it's good to talk about. So like the first one, my abuser went to jail for domestic violence and now I can't pay the rent. People still have the responsibility to pay their rent, right? And so these are things that I know in the advocacy world with social service agencies, they'll hear things like this and they will try to assist folks with getting access to resources and things. But this is something that we see, right? Where, you know, a lot of victims of domestic violence are financially controlled as well. And so this is a real thing that happens, that folks can't pay their rent when their abusers go to jail. Like I said, I don't have an easy answer to that. Like I don't think there is an easy answer for that, especially in today's housing market. Do you have anything? There's just not.
Well, as Nancy said, there are resources and there's a implicit burden placed upon the housing provider to accept any kind of alternatives to paying rent.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a duty, if you will, put upon the provider of the housing to work with
Mm-hmm.
the victim of domestic violence
Absolutely.
in staying in their unit.
And remembering specifically in the city of Tacoma, we have our source of income protected class. So if someone is receiving outside assistance, that is something that would be protected, because any, legally obtained income needs to be considered. Excuse me. So the next one says, the neighbors called the police because of screams coming from my apartment, but my abuser ran away before they got there. I was served with an eviction notice for violating the city's nuisance ordinance, or it might be the apartment complex has like a noise ordinance. So this person would either call us or call HUD and could potentially make a complaint that would be investigated. And just based off of this, I think it's a valid complaint.
True.
So the next one saying, I called the police on my abuser, but I was charged with child endangerment for having my son in this environment. Again, also something else that happens, we will see victims who are within different systems. So maybe they are with the housing authority getting assistance with their housing. Potentially they have a criminal case where they're a victim, and they may also have to be dealing with CPS because of something like this. And so these are just, again, there is no easy answer in that. And that is something, there are resources available in the community. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to have a list of resources that are there, but this is something real that happens where victims will be engaged with different systems like this, because they are also accountable to keeping their children safe. So this is something we see as well. My child told her teacher that her dad hits me, and now I'm getting calls from social services. My landlord knows I'm a victim of domestic violence and pressures me for sexual favors to avoid eviction. I applied for housing, but once the property manager found out about me being a survivor of domestic violence, my application was denied. I have a criminal record due to fighting off my abuser, and now I can't get housing. Like, these are all real stories of, people here in this community that they've experienced. And again, I don't have easy answers. There's a few in there that I would say they have a valid complaint that they could file with HUD that would be investigated. There's others that will get calls from folks in the community and will offer technical assistance and, try to help them kind of brainstorm how they can access housing or what they can do to better their situation. But these are things that happen. Unfortunately. Yeah. So these are a little bit more in depth. The first one talks about someone being denied because the manager states that they don't like renting to women who are survivors of domestic violence. Like, this would be a clear, this person could make a complaint and it would be investigated. And I would say there is a high probability that there would be a finding of discrimination based on the information there because of the direct evidence of discrimination based, and here it would be based on sex. If they're saying, I don't like to rent to women who are survivors of domestic violence. So it's something, my experience is that sometimes the folks who have experienced domestic violence could be some of the best tenants that you could ever have if they feel safe. So it's something that it's really important to be willing to work with folks and offer them housing. This is why we have the fair housing laws that we have.
Always remembering the duty that the landlord has, the provider of the housing has, to make sure that the victim has every reasonable chance and opportunity to stay in the housing.
Yeah. The next one talks about someone has an abusive ex-boyfriend who continues to break into their apartment. They're damaging the unit, and the landlord files for eviction against the survivor, again, violating that zero tolerance crime policy. And it's just really important to remember, like, who is responsible for the criminal activity. And in this case, it would be the ex-boyfriend, not the tenant. And that, this could be considered illegal and unequal treatment under the Fair Housing Act. And that and no one wants to live somewhere where there's a lot of crime happening. And so this idea of a crime-free policy could have a disparate impact though on victims of domestic violence. And so it's just really important to recognize that. Anything about crime-free policies? No,
No.
sounds good. The last one is kind of a dual one where we have a survivor of domestic violence with PTSD with post-traumatic stress disorder, and they have an emotional support cat to soothe their anxiety, and they've asked for a reasonable accommodation request based on that, and the property manager refuses that. We had one of our lunch and learns specifically about reasonable accommodations. If you have questions about that, I would definitely suggest you go back and look at that, because emotional support animals are not considered pets, and this could be considered illegal based on disability-based discrimination. So lots of different ways that people can be protected. You know, any kind of decision related to housing that is adverse, that's based on someone's status as a victim. So sorry. Denial of admission, eviction, and lack of access to emergency transfers if they're unsafe, lease bifurcation, and self-certification. So we're going to talk about each of these things a little bit. So this idea of assistance denial. So as a housing provider, you cannot deny admission to someone affected by VAWA based on the violence that is committed against them or any kind of reasons related to that. So for example, you know, eviction history, if they have a basis for that eviction that's related to the domestic violence and they share that with you, then that could be a basis not to consider that eviction.
Well, and by the way, the prior landlord that evicted them because of domestic violence would be on the hook too.
He would also, yes.
Just cause.
He's right. So, and you know, the idea of domestic violence is really like taking the control away from a victim. And so one of the things that advocacy groups talk about is helping victims regain power and control. So it's really important to give victims or survivors the option to stay even when there's been criminal activity at that space, because it's their decision. And so protections, well, they should apply to residents, tenants, household members. And so this is, and if you look at HUD's website, they have tons of information on there about VAWA right now, which is really, really helpful. So you can look on there to find more information with like specific HUD language. So with someone who has a housing voucher, sometimes they can ask for emergency transfers. And this is something that would be available, like one, the person who has the voucher, right? Like they need to request the transfer. It needs to be based on them having the belief that they are under threat of an imminent harm of further violence. And a safe unit needs to be available, right? So, and it's again, this idea that the survivor determines what is safe. So even if you as a housing provider are like, I don't know if that one's going to be safe for you, if they believe it is, then like we need to trust them to make the best decision for themselves. And so, and this is something even, you know, with Tacoma Housing Authority, I am sure that y'all have had this experience of folks requesting emergency transfers based on domestic violence. And I would just say, like, this is a really hard topic. And this is something that, again, like victims or survivors touch so many different, like housing and schooling and, you know, employment. And so any resources and any support that someone can give to a survivor of domestic violence really just aids in their own safety and their own healing. And I don't know, like I know Russ is someone, he always says, just do the right thing. And this is one of those that I'm like, just do the right thing, you know, like just recognize like this is a person that needs some help. So lease bifurcation means when a housing provider removes a household member from a lease in order to evict, remove, etc., when they've engaged in criminal activity related to VAWA, right? So related to violence or abuse. And so this is something that a survivor or victim may request. It's the housing provider's decision whether to bifurcate that person, and, you know, it should be done in accordance with the law. But it's definitely something that I would say you should speak to your attorney about this and make sure you're getting good legal advice about how to move forward when somebody makes a request like this. Of course, the survivor would need to be able to qualify, right, on their own, if that was something that they would be requesting.
But remember the duties on the housing provider to
Accept.
to accept alternate options
Mhm,
for the person to stay in their housing.
mhm. Yeah, maybe they have an aunt that wants to help out, or maybe there's a church that's willing to chip in, or,
And-
you know, lots of different ways that folks can meet
And with
their.
this lease bifurcation, once again, think of the word duty, right? So it should be common that, well, domestic violence shouldn't be common, but the lease bifurcation should be a common protocol. So you are getting the alleged victim into safe or to remain in safe housing
Mhm,
and taking the alleged perpetrator off the lease. That should be a common procedure.
mhm.
If the alleged victim indeed wants to stay there.
Mhm. Again, leaving the choice up to them. So these are questions that we'll hear sometimes. So as a DV, so domestic violence survivor, can I move without paying the rest of my lease? So, and in Washington, we have some laws here related to this specific topic. And so if a victim or survivor has a valid protection order or has made a record of reporting to a qualified third party about what has happened. So qualified third party could be a therapist, it could be a domestic violence advocate, it could be their pastor, it could be, I mean, it is expansive who a qualified third party could be.
Liberal interpretation.
And so then a victim has done this, and then they would then go to their landlord or their housing provider and say, I have experienced domestic violence. They would attach a copy of their protection order, their no contact order, or whatever their report was to the third party, and that they would like to break the lease, and they would give the time that they're going to do that. And so yes, they do have that option. So if I'm on a year lease and I've only lived there for a month, but then some domestic violence happened and I'm like, I can't stay here, it's not safe, I would qualify to be able to break my lease and not be financially responsible for the remainder of that lease.
And which by implicit means that any kind of fees involved with early
Mhm.
breaking of a lease can't be charged.
Yeah. This is another one that we'll hear. So say a survivor wants to stay in their housing, but they want to change their locks because their abuser has a copy of their keys. Can they ask the landlord to change the locks? Yes. They would give them a copy of the order, or again, that the letter to the qualified third party, and the landlord must change the locks. And again, you can charge the survivor for that. Like that could be a fee that you can do for that. There isn't an expectation necessarily that the survivor or that the landlord would pay for that. Sorry. And then also, don't give a copy of the new keys to the tenant who was put out, even if that person is on the lease. Especially like if they have a protection order that specifically says, you know, X person is not allowed back at this residence, the landlord or housing provider should not be providing a copy of the new keys to them if they change the locks.
And the alleged violator, since the lease has been bifurcated,
There, which is why you do that.
would not be on the lease anymore. So
There you go.
therefore, they
don't need
weren't in a
keys.
position to get keys.
There you go. And this is one that I've actually heard a lot, which makes me sad, to be honest, because I think if I experience domestic violence and I just want to feel safe in my home and I'm asking someone to change my locks, this doesn't feel like an overly burdensome thing to ask of a landlord. So, yeah.
Remember the duty.
Yeah. So here's some resources. We have some national resources and Washington State resources. And then the rest there, starting with the Crystal Judson Family Justice Center, YWCA Pierce County, Catherine Place, Rebuilding Hope Sexual Assault Center, and Our Sister's House are all local here in Tacoma. They serve Tacoma and Pierce County. Great resources, all free. And offer different kinds of support to victims of domestic violence, such as support groups, assistance with protection orders, lots of great things happening in our local community around protecting victims of domestic violence. And then, well, I know we're going to send this out afterwards. So if you take a screenshot or you can Google's amazing. And then I'll just add our contact information for myself and for Russ. And that is our presentation for this month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.